Yuna stood in the Imperial War Chamber and watched her empire die on a screen. The hologram showed the Battle of the Velen Corridor from 6 angles. 40 Galhari dreadnoughts, each one the length of a mountain, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a moon in half. They had been the pride of the Dominion. They had conquered 40 star systems. They had never known defeat. The human fleet that met them was 1/3 their size. The battle lasted 9 minutes. Yuna watched the human ships move like a school of fish, fast and together, turning at impossible angles, slipping between the dreadnoughts and cutting them open from the inside. There was no glory in it, no dramatic charges or desperate last stands. The humans simply took apart the most powerful fleet in the Dominion the way a mechanic takes apart an engine, piece by piece, without wasting a single movement. 30 admirals and generals stood around the hologram table, and not one of them could speak. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector, showing Galhari warships burning in the dark. Grand Marshal Daesung, Yuna's father, was the first to move. He slammed his fist on the table. The hologram flickered. "We build more ships," he said. His voice was iron. "We call the reserve fleets from the outer systems. We hit them again." "With what?" said Elder Kissen from the far end of the room. The old councilman's voice was thin and dry like dead leaves. "They destroyed 40 dreadnoughts in 9 minutes, Grand Marshal. We do not have another 40. Then we build them. That will take 11 years. The humans will be at our doorstep in 3 months. The argument went back and forth for an hour. Yuna stood by the wall and said nothing. She was the crown heir, eldest daughter of the Dominion, and her role in this room was to watch and learn. So she watched. She learned that her father's pride was going to kill them all. The message from Earth arrived the next morning. The Terran Republic did not demand territory. They did not demand money or resources or the surrender of the fleet. Their terms were strange, and to the Galhari court, insulting. They wanted a marriage. One member of the Galhari royal bloodline would marry a human chosen by Earth's council. A symbolic union to seal the peace. The Terran Republic called it a bridge between worlds. The Galhari court called it a leash. "They want to humiliate us," Daesung said at the emergency council meeting. "They want to parade one of our daughters like a trophy." "They want peace," Kisun replied, "and we are not in a position to refuse." The council voted. Daesung was overruled. The only question was which daughter would be sent. Yuna's younger sister, Hana, was 16. She was soft and bright, and loved painting pictures of the night sky from the palace balcony. When the council began debating which princess to send, Yuna saw Hana's name appear on the list, and something cold and hard settled in her chest. She stepped forward before anyone could speak. "I will go," she said. The room turned to look at her. Daesung's face went pale. "Yuna, I am the crown heir. If the Dominion must make this sacrifice, it should be made by someone who understands what it costs." She kept her voice flat and steady. She did not let them see that her hands were shaking behind her back. "I will go." That night, she sat with Hana in the garden. The younger girl cried. Yuna did not. "You are marrying a human," Hana whispered. "They are animals. They are brutal and loud, and they eat the flesh of beasts." "They also just defeated the most powerful fleet we have ever built," Yuna said quietly. "Perhaps we should stop calling them animals." She left the next day with Sumi, her handmaiden, aboard a diplomatic transport. The journey to neutral station Korra took 4 days. Yuna spent those 4 days reading everything the Galhari archives had on humans. They were a young species, short-lived, emotional, prone to violence. Their planet was a mess of oceans and mountains and unpredictable weather. They had been killing each other for thousands of years before they ever reached the stars. And yet no empire that had ever fought them had won. Yuna read that line 3 times. She told herself it was propaganda. She almost believed it. Neutral Station Korra was a spinning ring of metal and glass floating in empty space between Galhari and Terran territory. Yuna walked through the airlock in her formal white robes, her silver hair pinned high, her violet eyes revealing nothing. Sumi walked 2 steps behind her, trembling. The human delegation was already waiting. There were 5 of them. Military officers, a diplomat, and the groom. Yuna saw him and felt a wave of confusion so strong she almost stopped walking. He was not tall. He was not broad, or scarred, or fearsome. He stood at the back of the group in a simple dark uniform, and he was smiling. Not a warrior's grin or a politician's mask. Just a small, warm smile, the kind a person might give a neighbor on a quiet morning. His name was Tejo. He stepped forward and bowed in the Galhari style. It was slightly wrong, the angle too deep, the hands not quite right. But he had tried. That small fact landed somewhere in Yuna's chest, and she did not know what to do with it. "I brought tea," he said. He held up a silver thermos. "I thought you might be tired." Yuna stared at him. This was the man Earth had chosen. This was the representative of the species that had just broken the spine of her empire's navy. He was offering her tea from a thermos. "Thank you," she said, and did not take it. The wedding was held 1 hour later in a small room on the station. No flowers, no music. Just 2 delegations standing on opposite sides, and a human official reading the words. Tejo said his vows in Galhari. His pronunciation was imperfect, and he stumbled twice. But he did not stop, and he looked at her while he spoke. Yuna said her vows in a flat voice, staring at the wall behind his head. When it was done, they signed the treaty. 2 copies, 1 for each world. Yuna's hand did not shake. She made sure of that. Afterward, she boarded the human ship that would take her to Earth. It was smaller than she expected. The corridors were narrow, and the lights were warm instead of the cool white she was used to. Everything smelled faintly of coffee and metal and something green she could not name. She found the observation deck and stood at the viewport. The stars stretched out in every direction, cold and endless, and exactly the same as they looked from home. Everything else was different now. Behind her, somewhere in the ship, she could hear Tejo talking to his crew. His voice was calm and kind and carried the easy warmth of a man who was loved by the people around him. Yuna pressed her fingers against the cold glass and told herself that none of it mattered. This was politics. This was survival. She was a bride of treaty and ash, and she would endure it the way she endured everything. She did not look back. Yuna had expected a fortress world, a planet of iron and fire, where every building was a barracks and every citizen a soldier. The species that had torn apart her empire's fleet in 9 minutes surely lived on a world built for war. Instead, she found rain. The shuttle descended through thick gray clouds, and when it broke through, the city below was green and silver and alive with movement. Towers of glass caught the light. Rivers of traffic moved between them, and everywhere in every gap and corner there were trees. "This is Seoul," Unji said from the seat beside her. Unji was the Terran diplomat assigned to the transition. She was a sharp-faced woman with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. "The capital zone of the Terran Republic, your new home." Yuna said nothing. She watched a group of children running through a park below. They were chasing each other and laughing. On the Galhari throne world, children did not play in public spaces. It was considered undignified. The residence was a wide, quiet building on a hillside overlooking the river. It had large windows and wooden floors, and a kitchen that smelled like something warm and unfamiliar. Tejo showed her the rooms with the careful politeness of a hotel manager. Her bedroom was on the east side. His was on the west. There was a shared living space between them. "If you need anything changed, just tell me," he said. "It is adequate," Yuna replied, and closed her door. For the first 2 weeks, she treated the marriage like a prison sentence. She spoke to Taeho only when necessary. She ate alone. She spent her hours reading reports from the Dominion and sending coded updates to Elder Kisun, who had asked her to gather intelligence on human military capabilities. But the problem with intelligence gathering was that there was nothing to gather. He was a man who woke up early, made breakfast, left a covered plate outside her door, and never mentioned it if she did not eat it. He read books in the evening. He hummed while he washed dishes. He was, by every measure Yuna could find, painfully ordinary. It was Sumi who first cracked. He talks to plants, Sumi reported one evening, sitting on the edge of Yuna's bed with wide, troubled eyes. There is a garden on the roof. He goes up there every morning and talks to them. He calls them by names. That is strange, Yuna admitted. And his friend, the loud one, Byung-ho. He came today and they cooked together, and they were laughing so hard the smoke alarm went off. I thought the building was under attack. Yuna almost smiled. She caught herself and looked away. Byung-ho was a problem. He was Taeho's second-in-command and oldest friend, a big man with a booming voice and absolutely no sense of personal space. He visited 3 times a week, and every visit filled the quiet residence with noise and warmth and the smell of food Yuna did not recognize. He told stories. That was the dangerous part. He told stories about Taeho without thinking, the way old friends do. And through those stories, pieces of a picture began to form that Yuna did not want to see. Did he ever tell you about the time he carried Jisoo on his back for 6 kilometers through a swamp on training day? Byung-ho said one evening, laughing so hard his face was red. The kid had broken his ankle, and Taeho just picked him up like a bag of rice and kept going. Finished the course dead last, but he finished. That is inefficient, Yuna said from the kitchen doorway. She had not meant to be listening. Byung-ho looked at her and grinned. Yeah, that is pretty much Taeho in one word. Inefficient. He will always choose the harder path if it means nobody gets left behind. In the back row, one small boy held a smaller child in his arms. The boy's hands were bandaged. Yuna picked up the photo and stared at it for a long time. Then she put it back, exactly where she found it, and left the room. That afternoon, Unji came by with a data tablet. The Grand Marshal asked me to give you the official Galhari account of First Contact, she said. I thought you might also want to see the Terran version. She placed 2 files on the tablet. Yuna read the Galhari version first. It was familiar. Humans had been discovered on a small planet in an unremarkable system. They had been hostile from the start. The Dominion had been forced to respond to their aggression. Then she read the Terran version. It was different. Very different. The first Galhari ship to reach Earth had not come in peace. It had come to survey the planet for resource extraction, and when the humans refused to submit, the ship had fired on a coastal city. 60,000 people died in 11 minutes. Humans did not start the war. They finished it. Yuna sat with the tablet in her lap for a long time after she finished reading. The rain was tapping against the window. Somewhere downstairs, Taeho was humming while he cooked dinner. She could smell garlic and sesame and something sweet. Her communicator buzzed. A message from Elder Kisun. Report. What have you learned about their weapons systems, their fleet deployment patterns, their weaknesses? Yuna looked at the message. She looked at the photograph she could still see in her mind. The small boy with bandaged hands holding a child in a burned building. She looked at the plate of food that appeared outside her door every morning, without fail, without comment, without expectation. She typed back. Still gathering. Nothing useful yet. It was the first lie she had ever told the council. She told herself it would be the last. That night, she could not sleep. She went to the kitchen for water and found the door to the rooftop garden open. She climbed the stairs quietly, and stopped at the top. Taeho was sitting on a wooden bench among the plants. The city lights made the sky glow orange below the clouds. He was holding a small clay pot with a seedling in it, turning it gently in his scarred hands. He did not see her. She watched him for a long time, this quiet man from a world that should have been her enemy, tending to something small and green and alive in the middle of the night. She went back to bed without making a sound, but she left her bedroom door open, just a little, for the first time since she arrived. The border ceremony was held 3 months after the wedding on a diplomatic station along the old front line, where Galhari and human ships had killed each other just weeks before. The scars were still visible, burn marks on the hull, patches of new metal where old metal had been torn away. Someone had placed flowers along the main corridor. Yuna did not know which side had done it. She stood beside Taeho in the grand hall, dressed in white and silver, performing unity for the cameras. Around them, Galhari and human delegates mixed like oil and water. Polite words, careful smiles, everyone watching everyone else. Yuna noticed something she had not expected. The Galhari delegates looked at her with pity. Poor Yuna, married to a beast, sacrificed for the good of the Dominion. She could see it in their eyes, and it made her jaw tight. But the human delegates looked at Taeho with something else entirely. Not pity, not pride. Something quieter and deeper. The way people look at someone who has given up something precious and never complained about it. Yuna did not understand it yet. She filed it away. The ceremony was long and full of speeches. Yuna stood straight and still and let the words wash over her. She was thinking about breakfast that morning. Taeho had made something called hutak, a sweet pancake filled with brown sugar and seeds. He had burned the first one and laughed at himself. She had eaten 3 without meaning to. She was thinking about this when the explosion happened. It was small, a flash of light and a crack of sound from the east corridor, followed by the shriek of tearing metal. The lights flickered, alarms screamed. People began to run. Yuna did not move. She was trained for crisis. She had stood in war rooms, watching planets burn. But her body was slow, and the world was loud. And before she could take a single step, something warm and solid covered her completely. Taeho. He had moved without thinking. His body was between her and the blast, his arms around her, his back to the corridor, where smoke was pouring through a cracked wall. A piece of shrapnel had caught his shoulder. She could feel the wet heat of blood through his uniform. He did not let go. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was steady. His hands were shaking. "No," she whispered. Security teams flooded the hall. The explosion was contained. A rogue Galhari nationalist group had planted a small device as a protest against the peace. No one was killed. 7 people were injured. Taeho was one of them. When the medics arrived, he was still standing between Yuna and the damaged corridor. The shrapnel had cut deep into his left shoulder. Blood had soaked through his uniform and dripped on the polished floor. "Check Sumi first," he said to the medic. She was closer to the blast. The medic looked at the blood running down his arm. "Sir, you are—" She was closer. "Please." Yuna stood 2 steps behind him and felt something break open in her chest that she had been holding shut for a very long time. They returned to Earth the next day. Taeho's arm was in a sling. He told Byung-ho it was nothing. He told Yuna it did not hurt. She knew he was lying, because she watched him wince every time he reached for something with his left hand. And every time he caught her looking, he smiled and changed the subject. 3 days after they returned, Unji took Yuna to a place she had never heard of. It was a building on the edge of the city, low and quiet and surrounded by water. Inside, there was a wall. The wall stretched from one end of the building to the other, curving gently. and it was covered from floor to ceiling with names. Millions of names. Small, neat letters carved into dark stone, row after row after row, so many that Yuna's eyes could not find the end of them. "What is this?" she asked. "A memorial," Enji said. "These are the names of every human who died in military service, going back 500 years. Yuna walked along the wall. She reached out and touched the stone. The names were cool under her fingers. "On Galhari, we build monuments to victories," Yuna said quietly. "Statues of generals, carvings of battles won." "We do not celebrate war," Enji said. She stood with her hands behind her back, looking at the names. "We survive it, and then we remember the ones who did not." Yuna stopped walking. She was standing in front of a section near the middle of the wall. The names here were dense and close together. Thousands of them in a single column. "The First Galhari War," Yunji said, following her gaze. 14 months. 200,000 dead. The numbers sat in the air between them like a stone. "Every empire in the galaxy has tried to break humanity at some point," Yunji continued. Her voice was not angry. It was tired. "The Galhari, the Vasun, the Meridian Compact. Every single one expected us to give up after enough losses. Every single one was wrong." She turned to look at Yuna directly. "We are not dangerous because we are strong, Yuna. We are dangerous because we do not stop. You can burn our cities and we will build new ones. You can kill our soldiers and their children will enlist. You can break everything we have, and we will sit in the ashes and start again, because that is what we have always done. That is all we know how to do." The boy with bandaged hands holding a smaller child. She thought of Teiho's garden on the roof, green and alive in a city built on the bones of a dozen wars. "That is why no empire fights you," Yuna said. It was not a question. "That is why no empire fights us twice," Unji replied. That night, Yuna went to Teiho's room. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, trying to change the bandage on his shoulder with one hand. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway and started to say something polite, something about being fine, something about not needing help. She sat down beside him and took the bandage from his hand. He went quiet. She cleaned the wound carefully. It was deep and ugly, and it had been meant for her. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. She did not look at his face. She kept her eyes on the wound, on the new skin forming around the edges of the cut, on the work of keeping him whole. "The marriage, you could have refused. Anyone could have refused." Teiho was silent for a moment. She could feel him thinking, the way she had learned to feel it over 3 months of living beside him. The slight stillness before he chose his words. "Because I was tired of people dying," he said, "on both sides, for reasons that stopped making sense a long time ago. And I thought if someone from our side could show your people who we really are, not our ships or our weapons, but who we are when we are just living, maybe the hate would run out of fuel." Yuna finished wrapping the bandage. She smoothed the edge down gently. Her fingers rested on his arm for a moment longer than necessary. "That is a very naive thing to believe," she said. "Probably," he agreed. "It is also the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." He looked at her then, and she looked back, and for the first time since the wedding on that cold station, she did not look away. Later, she went up to the rooftop garden. She sat on the wooden bench among the quiet plants and the glow of the city. After a while, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Teiho sat down beside her, with his arm in the sling, and said nothing. They sat together in the dark, and watched the clouds move over the city lights. Neither of them spoke. For the first time, the silence between them was not a wall. It was a room they both chose to be in. When Yuna went back to her quarters, she opened her communicator. There was a new message from Elder Kisun. She read it once, then typed her reply with steady hands. "There is nothing here to exploit. Stop asking." She deleted the encryption channel and set the communicator down on the table. Then she went to sleep, and for the first time in 3 months, she did not dream of war. 6 months after the wedding, Yuna learned to make kimchi jjigae. It took her 4 tries. The first batch was so salty that Taeho drank 3 glasses of water and said nothing. The second was so bland that Sumi, who had barely touched human food for months, took 1 sip and quietly pushed the bowl away. The third was acceptable. The fourth was good, and when Taeho tasted it, he closed his eyes and nodded slowly. And Yuna felt a warmth in her chest that she did not have a Galhari word for. Their life had changed. Not suddenly, not with any grand declaration, but the way seasons change, so slowly that you only notice when you look back. They ate together now. They talked in the evenings. Yuna taught Taeho Galhari calligraphy, guiding his clumsy hand through the flowing strokes, and he taught her the names of every plant on the rooftop garden. She knew them all now. She had her favorites. She would never admit it, but Yuna had caught her playing a card game with Byung-ho in the kitchen 3 times that week, and once she had heard Sumi laugh so hard she snorted. When Yuna mentioned it later, Sumi turned pale and said she had been conducting cultural research. It was a good life, a quiet life. Yuna had stopped sending reports to the Dominion weeks ago. She had stopped thinking of Earth as enemy territory. She had started thinking of the rooftop garden as hers. Then the summons came. A galactic summit had been called at the Grand Neutral Assembly, a massive station in deep space where the major empires gathered to address threats that affected everyone. The reason was a species called the Vrek Communion. They were old, cold, and expanding. In the past year, they had annexed 3 border worlds belonging to smaller nations, burning the populations that resisted. No one had stopped them. No one had tried. Several of the smaller nations had formally petitioned the Terran Republic for military protection. Earth had not answered yet. The summit would decide. Yuna traveled with Taeho to the assembly. The station was enormous, a city floating in the void, and it was filled with delegations from every major power in the galaxy. Yuna recognized many of them. The tall, pale Meridians, the insect-like Vosun, her own people, the Galhari, standing in a tight, anxious group near the central chamber. But it was the humans she watched. Every other delegation was restless. The Galhari were whispering, the Meridians were pacing, the Vosun were clicking their mandibles in patterns that Yuna knew meant fear. The Vrek threat was real and close and growing, and every empire in the room was calculating the cost of action against the cost of doing nothing. The humans were still. Not frozen, not tense, still the way deep water is still. They sat in their seats with their hands folded, and they listened, and they waited, and there was something in that patience that made the air around them feel heavier. Yuna had seen this before, in small ways, in the way Taeho paused before he spoke, in the way he absorbed bad news without flinching. But she had never seen it at this scale, an entire delegation radiating the same quiet, terrible calm. The Vrek Communion had sent an envoy. He was tall and gray-skinned, with black eyes that reflected no light, and he spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. He addressed the assembly with open contempt, dismissing the petitions of the smaller nations as irrelevant, calling their worlds strategic necessities for the Communion's growth. Then he turned to the human delegation. "We advise the Terran Republic to remain uninvolved," he said. His voice carried through the chamber like a blade. "Interference would be unwise." The chamber was silent. Every eye turned to the humans. Yuna felt her pulse quicken. Taeho stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not clench his fists or square his shoulders, or do any of the things that warriors did in the stories Yuna had grown up with. He simply stood, and the room contracted around him. "The world of Pelos had a population of 9 million, he said. His voice was even and clear. The world of Anthar had 12 million. The world of Sevik had 6 million. 27 million people across 3 worlds. Farmers and teachers and children and old people who had never held a weapon in their lives. He paused. The Vrek envoy's black eyes narrowed. The Terran Republic has reviewed the situation, Teho continued. We will not permit a fourth world to fall. The Vrek envoy stared at Teho, and Yuna saw something she had never expected to see on an alien face. Not anger. Fear. The envoy recognized something in Teho's voice that Yuna was only now beginning to understand. It was not a threat. It was a fact. The humans had decided, and that was the end of the discussion. The envoy left the chamber without another word. Yuna stood beside Teho afterward. Her hands were trembling, and she did not know why. She had watched him tend plants and cook breakfast and laugh at Byung-ho's jokes. She had seen him wince when his shoulder hurt, and pretend it did not. She thought she knew who he was. She was wrong. She had known only half of him. The gentle half was real, but underneath it, holding it up like bedrock under soft earth, was something immovable. When Teho decided that something mattered, there was no negotiation, no calculation, no doubt. There was only the decision and the willingness to pay whatever it cost. This was what the galaxy feared. Not human weapons, not human ships. This, the absolute unshakable certainty of a species that chose with its heart and then refused to back down. 2 days after the summit, Yuna received a message from the Dominion. Her father was requesting her return for a brief visit. Diplomatic courtesy, the message said. Family obligations. She went. She should not have. The throne world of Salith had not changed. The same silver towers, the same cold, beautiful gardens, the same silence in the halls where voices were kept low and emotions were kept lower. Yuna walked through the palace and felt like a stranger in her own skin. She met with her father. He was thinner than she remembered. The war and its aftermath had aged him. He asked her polite questions about Earth and did not listen to the answers. He asked about Teho with barely hidden disdain. Yuna kept her face still and her answers short. That night, she could not sleep. She walked the palace corridors the way she had done as a child, following the familiar paths through the moonlit halls. And that was how she found it. A door that should have been locked was opened by a crack. Light spilled from inside. Voices, low and urgent. Yuna pressed herself against the wall and listened. Elder Kisun's voice, and another voice, cold and flat, speaking through a communicator. The language was not Galhari. It took Yuna a moment to place it. Vrek. Her blood went cold. She listened for 10 minutes. It was enough. Kisun had been negotiating with the Vrek communion in secret. The deal was simple and devastating. The Galhari would allow Vrek warships to pass through their territory, giving the communion a direct route to Earth's undefended flank. In exchange, the Vrek would weaken the Terran Republic, and the Galhari would reclaim their lost prestige. Kisun was selling out the peace. He was selling out the marriage. He was selling out the man who had taken shrapnel in his shoulder to protect a woman from the Empire that was now planning his destruction. Yuna stood in the dark corridor with her hand pressed against the cold wall and made a choice. It was not a difficult choice. That surprised her. She had expected it to be the hardest decision of her life, choosing between her empire and the truth, between her blood and her conscience. It was not hard at all. She returned to her guest quarters. She pulled up the encrypted Terran communication channel that Unji had given her months ago for emergencies. She transmitted everything she had heard, every detail, every name, every coordinate. Then she booked passage back to Earth on the first available transport. Teho was waiting at the port when she arrived. He was standing alone in the arrivals hall with his hands in his pockets. He looked tired. He looked worried. He looked like a man who had not slept in 2 days. He knew. Unji must have told him. He knew what Yuna had done, what she had given up, what it meant. He did not thank her. He did not make a speech or a promise or a declaration. He just looked at her, with those warm, steady eyes, and then he held out his hand. Yuna took it. It was the first time they had touched like this, not by accident, not by necessity, but by choice. His hand was warm and rough and scarred, and it held hers gently, the way he held everything, with care and without force. They walked out of the port together, hand in hand, into the rain. The Vrek Communion attacked on a Tuesday morning. Yuna was on the rooftop garden watering the basil when the alert came through. Every screen in the city lit up at once. Every communicator buzzed. The emergency broadcast was calm and clear, the way human emergency broadcasts always were. No panic, no drama, just facts. 3 Vrek battle groups had crossed through Galhari space using the corridor that Elder Kisson had sold them. They had struck the border colony of Ashfall Station, destroying the orbital defense platform and landing troops on the surface. 800,000 civilians were trapped below. The Vrek had given them 12 hours to surrender. The Terran Republic had given them something else, a promise. Yuna stood on the rooftop with wet hands and a watering can and watched the city below come alive, with something that looked almost like a held breath, a vast collective stillness before movement. Then the movement began. Recruitment stations opened within the hour. The lines stretched around entire blocks. Yuna watched from the window of the residence as people walked calmly through the rain to volunteer. She saw old men with gray hair. She saw young women with university bags still on their shoulders. She saw a man in a chef's apron walk out of a restaurant, cross the street, and join the line without breaking stride. No one had ordered them. No imperial decree. No conscription notice. No threats or punishments for those who stayed home. They simply went, because someone far away was in danger, and they had decided it mattered. Factories shifted production overnight. Yunji told her that civilian engineers were converting manufacturing lines to produce field supplies, medical equipment, and emergency shelters. Teachers were organizing evacuation logistics for the border colonies. Musicians were packing medical kits. An entire civilization was turning itself into a machine of survival, not because it wanted war, but because it refused to let 800,000 strangers die alone. Teho received his recall orders that evening. He would take command of the 3rd Border Fleet and deploy to the front within 24 hours. He told Yuna in the kitchen. He was making dinner. He had not stopped making dinner. The stew was on the stove, and the rice was in the cooker, and his recall orders were on the table between the salt and the soy sauce, and he spoke about it the way he spoke about everything. Quietly, honestly, without making himself larger or smaller than he was. I do not know how long it will take, he said. Byung-ho will stay here. He will make sure you and Sumi are safe. I do not need Byung-ho to keep me safe, Yuna said. But he will worry if he does not have someone to protect. It is how he is built. Yuna looked at him across the kitchen. The light was warm. The stew was bubbling. He looked exactly the same as he had looked every evening for 6 months. Calm and kind and present. But his bag was packed by the door, and in the morning he would walk into the kind of war that empires did not survive. I was afraid of your people when I came here, she said. The words came out before she could stop them, raw and unpolished. I was afraid of what I thought you were. Now I am afraid for you, because you will walk into fire for strangers and call it duty, and you will not stop, and you will not run. And I... She stopped. Her voice had broken. She had never let her voice break in her entire life. Teho crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her. He did not touch her. He just stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. It is love. We just define it wider than most. He left the next morning before sunrise. Yuna stood at the door and watched him walk down the street, with his bag over his good shoulder, the one without the scar. He turned once and looked back at her. He did not wave. He just looked, as if he were memorizing her face. Then he kept walking, and the rain swallowed him up. The next 3 days were the longest of Yuna's life. She monitored the war from the residence, with Sumi, Byung-ho, and Eunji. The reports came in fragments. The 3rd Border Fleet had engaged the Vrek advance force near Ashfall Station. The fighting was brutal. The Vrek outnumbered the humans nearly 2 to 1. The first day, the Terran fleet lost 40 ships. The reports said the Vrek expected a retreat. No retreat came. The second day, the Terran fleet lost 30 more. Reinforcements arrived. A second fleet, pulled from deep patrol along the outer territories. They folded into the battle line without pause. The Vrek pushed harder. The humans held. On the 3rd day, there was silence. 12 hours of nothing. No reports. No signals. The communication relay near Ashfall had gone dark. Byung-ho sat in the living room and stared at the wall. Sumi held his hand without saying a word. Eunji made tea that nobody drank. Yuna sat by the window and looked at the garden. The basil needed water. She did not move. Then the signal came back. The voice on the broadcast was human, tired and crackling through static, but alive. The Vrek advance force had been stopped. Not destroyed, stopped. The Terran fleet had taken catastrophic losses, nearly half its ships damaged or gone, and it had held the line. When the 3rd Terran fleet arrived from the inner systems, and then the 4th, the Vrek communion realized what every empire before them had realized. You could not outlast humans. You could hurt them. You could bleed them. You could make them grieve. But they would bury their dead and stand back up and be there the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that, forever. Because giving up was something their species had simply never learned to do. A Vrek commander sent an open broadcast that was intercepted and translated. The words spread across the galaxy within hours. They do not stop. We kill them, and they grieve, and they come back. What are these creatures? The Vrek communion agreed to a full ceasefire within the week. In the aftermath, while the galaxy was still reeling, Yuna did something no Galhari royal had ever done. She requested a public broadcast to the Galhari High Council and the people of the Dominion. She stood in the residence, in the kitchen where Taeho had made her breakfast every morning for 6 months, and she spoke to her people. I was sent to Earth as a sacrifice, she said. I was told that humans were primitive, that they were soft, that they were beneath us. I believed it. I was wrong. She paused. She thought of the memorial wall, the names carved in stone, the children in the park, the man who talked to his plants and carried wounded soldiers on his back, and shielded his enemy's daughter with his own body, without a moment of hesitation. Humans are the only species in this galaxy that fights harder when they are losing, she continued, that loves harder when they are hurting, that builds faster than they are broken. They do not conquer because they do not need to. They do not threaten because they do not want to, but every empire that has raised a hand against them has learned the same lesson. Her voice was steady now, clear and sure, and carrying a weight that she had earned over 6 months of learning what strength really looked like. You cannot defeat a people who have already survived everything, and chose to be kind anyway. The galaxy heard it. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Galhari did not know what to say. Taeho came home on a gray morning 3 weeks later. Yuna saw him from the window, walking up the street with a slight limp that had not been there before. Byung-ho was with him, carrying both their bags, talking loudly about something. Taeho was smiling. Yuna went downstairs. She opened the door. He stood on the step, thinner than before, with new lines around his eyes, and a bandage on his leg, and rain in his hair. He started to say something. She did not let him finish. She took his face in both hands, the hands that had signed a treaty she once thought was her death sentence, and she kissed him. It was not political. It was not symbolic. It was the realest thing she had ever done. Behind them, Sumi stood in the hallway, pressing her hand over her mouth, tears running down her face. Byung-ho was beside her, crying loudly and openly, and not even slightly ashamed about it. Taeho pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were bright. "The basil," he said. "Did you water the basil?" Yuna laughed. It was a real laugh, full and warm and completely unguarded. The first one she had ever let anyone hear. "Yes, I watered the basil." "Good," he said. "That is all that matters." They went inside. The door closed. The rain kept falling on the city and on the garden, and on a galaxy that was slowly, carefully learning what the humans had always known. That the strongest thing in the universe was not a weapon or a warship or an empire. It was a man with scarred hands, planting seeds on a rooftop because he believed that things could grow. Yuna had crossed the stars to end a war. She had not expected to find the one thing her empire, with all its power, had never been able to build.